Painting fine lines is a common skill which we need for flower stems, tree branches, grasses, and for lots of small details. Sometimes, even though you have the right tools, the result can seem less than ideal, and the main reason for this is lack of control over the amount of water on your brush. I'm using a liner brush, which is commonly used for painting detailed fine lines. It's an animal bristle liner brush. The color I'm using today is Phthalo Blue. This is an intense color. A ceramic palette is necessary for this practice. For the first attempt, I'm not adding any additional water, so this is the original consistency of the paint from the tube. We can see the paint is thick, not easy to move around on the palette. When I'm painting on paper, the line starts off thick and ends with a little almost dry brush effect. When painting, it feels like there's a bit of friction holding the brush back. This consistency is not easy to control for a soft and thin brush head like this. For the second one, I dip the whole brush head in the brush washer once, and then swirl it around the palette. When painting, the brush glides smoothly on the paper and the result turns out to be a very fine and well-saturated line. This is the ideal feeling for painting a thin line like a flower stem. Without loading any paint, I directly dip the same whole brush head into the washer again. As we can see, the paint is smooth on the palette, and when it comes to this consistency, you can expect to achieve a nice fine line. So if you want to paint a fine line, try to control the amount of water in between these two dips. You don't necessarily need to dip in the water the same way as I do. I just did it for demonstration purpose. The fourth time adding water. When it's come to the fourth time of doing it, we can obviously notice that the line is very smooth, but it's also getting thicker. The increased thickness is not a result of me pushing the brush down harder. It's because the amount of water is getting to be much more for the brush to handle, and so it tends to collect at the tip of the brush head due to gravity. So the tip is no longer as fine as before, and this will make your stroke thicker and more difficult to control. The fifth time is noticeably lighter after the fifth time loading water. The thickness is similar to the fourth time. For the sixth time, we can observe that the paint on the palette is smaller than the previous time. And also the line painted on the paper is significantly finer than it was on the fifth time. For the seventh and eighth time, we can see that the paint blotches are separating more and more on the palette. When we are painting with this consistency, we can see that the line is lighter and finer. It becomes very muted and the edge looks much more blotchy than any of the previous ones. And now, if we compare all of these as a whole, we can see that the second and the third time would be ideal for a saturated fine line, such as when painting a loose flower stem. Water control is a key skill to learn for watercolor. However, the amount of water is difficult to quantify. One way we can learn is to dab the paint on a palette and observe the consistency of the paint on the palette. The performance of different brands and colors can vary as well, so the number of times you dip may be different. So this is not an exact science, but it gives you an idea of how it works. That's the reason I recorded loading water several times using the same brush. It doesn't mean you have to load as many times as I did every time you paint. This is just a guide to help you find the desired consistency.